Nobel Prize winner, someone who's always, extremely good at excelling everything. And you talked some points yesterday where he was really fun and really human to see. So if you can repeat for all of our folks here a little bit of your story of, how you became from Mars and then you ended up in physics for MIT.
Okay, well, I'm sorry to repeat this for those who heard it before, but I will do what you asked me to do. Do what I'm afraid of. No, I'm happy to do that. When I was in high school, well, actually as a child, I loved to draw and paint, and I spent most of my time doing it. And when I went into high school, I went into a very special program, a high school which allowed me to draw and paint for 3 hours a day, and I took very little mathematics. I think I took one course in algebra and one course in solid geometry. I had one course in physics, which was so bad that the only thing I remember from that course was that the teacher burned his sleeve with a Bunsen burner. And that's all I can retain from that course. So physics at that point had made very little, it had very little influence on me. And I was happily doing my art, and I was actually reasonably proficient in it. I got a couple of national prizes for some of the work I did. And in my third year, at the end of my third year of high school, I happened to go to a museum in Chicago called the Museum of Science and Industry, which I'm sure Bob knows extremely well. And it's a wonderful museum. And it was very exciting. And I went into the bookstore and I got a book written by Albert Einstein called Relativity. And this book suggested that if you read this book carefully, you would understand special relativity at least. It would talk a little bit about general relativity, but it made no attempt to have you understand that. But if you could read that book and go through the equations, you could understand special relativity. So the reason I picked up this book was that Albert Einstein was a household name. He was a great hero to my parents. And I heard about these strange things that he had predicted, that a meter stick that moves very fast will shrink, and a clock that moves very fast will slow down. And I said, gee, this is really neat stuff. I'd like to understand this. So I got this book, and I spent the whole summer going through it. I went through all the equations. It's the so-called Lorentz transformations. And at the end of the summer, I sort of summed it up by saying, gee, this is an interesting book, but I still don't understand it. And the reason I didn't understand it is a very fundamental, actually, principle in physics, which took me a while to understand after I started studying physics, and namely, that why the velocity of light is the same in every inertial system. So, for example, if a train is coming toward you and somebody throws a stone in your direction, well, the velocity of that stone is increased by the velocity of the train. That's called a Galilean transformation. But in special relativity, if somebody turns on a flashlight and measures the velocity of light doesn't change. It's the same on the train as it would appear on the platform. And I couldn't understand that at all. So I said that this is really interesting, and I really like to understand it. So actually, instead of accepting a scholarship to the Museum School of the Arts in Chicago, I went to the University of Chicago, and I spent 2 years reading great books, and then I entered the physics department. And that was interesting because, after all, Albert Einstein was my hero, and I decided I want to be a theoretician. I'm going to go into physics. I want to be a theoretician. But Enrico Fermi gave a lecture to the incoming class and said, I think that all the great developments in the next 20 years will be in experimental physics. And I recommend that you go into experimental physics. So actually, just about everybody in my class, I think, except one student, went into experimental physics. And that's why I ended up as an experimentalist. And I'm not unhappy about it because I think it worked out reasonably well. But, so that's how I began. And to the students here, I want to say one thing. It was hard. I was far behind the other students. I had to catch up. It was extremely competitive with a very high flunk-out rate. And I said to myself, I'm not going to drop out because it's so difficult, and I'm not doing as well as I'd like to do. I said to myself, as long as I love this subject, I'm going to stay in. And if I leave, they're going to have to flunk me out. And I decided that I would continue, and I slowly caught up, and finally I passed all the examinations and qualified for my Ph.D. research. And so here's another thing for the students here. So I came to the point of asking myself, whom do I want to work for in the department? The department had some really wonderful physics professors. Fermi had assembled probably the greatest physics department in the world at that point. And so, but I said to myself, well, if I'm going to work for anybody, I would like to work for the great man himself, Enrico Fermi. So I gathered up my courage, and I met him in the corridor, and I asked him if I could work under his supervision. And to my great surprise, he didn't even ask me about how I did in my classwork, how I did in my examinations. He said yes. And I couldn't believe it. It was as though I had won the lottery. And so this is to the students. It's worth taking risks. You know, aspire. Don't be frightened by the possibility of failure. Because if you're in science and you're afraid of failure, you can never do anything significant, because everything you're going to try that's really important may possibly be wrong. It may be a bad idea. And you have to have the conviction that you have thought about this and it's reasonable and you should try it. And so I think that will just sort of start off. I think I've talked long enough, but just to give you a flavor of how I got started and some of the philosophy that I learned from my own experience.